The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for many years. They cried out for freedom from Pharaoh's rule. Moses, a Hebrew raised as an Egyptian prince, was chosen by God to lead his people to freedom. Moses returned to Egypt and stood before Pharaoh. He boldly declared, "Let my people go." Pharaoh scoffed at Moses' words. He refused to release the Israelites from their forced labor. Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He believed himself to be a god, mightier than the God Moses spoke of. Little did he know his defiance would bring unimaginable consequences upon Egypt. Moses warned Pharaoh that Egypt would face terrible plagues if he did not heed God's command. Pharaoh remained unconvinced and unmoved. He would soon learn the cost of defying the Almighty. The first plague was about to be unleashed, turning the lifeblood of Egypt into a source of horror. The Nile River, Egypt's lifeline, was the target of the first plague. With a strike of Moses' staff, the river's waters transformed into blood. The Egyptians watched in horror as their precious river, the source of their life and sustenance, turned into a crimson torrent. The stench of rotting fish filled the air, making the once great river unbearable. The plague brought death to the fish in the river, disrupting the ecosystem. The water, now foul and unusable, brought disease and despair. The Egyptians, reliant on the Nile for drinking water, irrigation and sanitation, found their lives thrown into chaos. Still, Pharaoh remained unyielding, his heart hardened against the plight of his people and the pleas of Moses. The second plague arrived, amplifying the misery inflicted upon Egypt. Hordes of frogs, summoned by Aaron's staff, swarmed the land. They invaded homes, fields, and even Pharaoh's palace. The creatures hopped and leapt through every crevice, a living, croaking tide. Their presence disrupted every aspect of daily life, turning even the simplest tasks into ordeals. Sleep became impossible, meals were ruined, and even the sanctity of temples was violated by the relentless amphibians. The plague brought not only discomfort, but also disease. The rotting carcasses of frogs polluted the air and water, further increasing the Egyptians' misery. Yet Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. He refused to acknowledge the power of God or the pleas of his own people. Section 4. The Plague of Pests. The third plague brought forth a wave of tiny tormentors lice. These minuscule insects, appearing from the dust, infested every corner of Egypt. They crawled on people and animals alike, causing unbearable itching and irritation. The Egyptians, already reeling from the previous plagues, found themselves scratching their skin raw. The constant discomfort made sleep and work impossible. The fine dust from the lice permeated everything, making even breathing a trial. Temples and palaces, once symbols of grandeur, were now infested with the tiny pests, showcasing the reach of this plague. Pharaoh's pride, however, remained unbroken. He refused to acknowledge the suffering of his people or the power behind these plagues. Section 5. Beasts on the loose. The fourth plague unleashed a terror of a different kind. Wild beasts. Swarms of flies, or perhaps wild animals, depending on the interpretation, descended upon Egypt. These creatures, driven by an unknown force, rampaged through the streets, spreading fear and chaos. Livestock were attacked, crops were destroyed, and people lived in fear of being bitten or trampled. The very fabric of Egyptian society, built on order and control, seemed to be unraveling. The plague of wild beasts brought a primal fear to the forefront, reminding the Egyptians of their vulnerability. But Pharaoh, blinded by his pride, remained unmoved. He refused to see the devastation around him, attributing it to anything but the power of God. Section 6. A pestilence upon the land. The fifth plague struck at the heart of Egypt's economy and food supply. A devastating pestilence. A deadly disease swept through their livestock. Cattle, sheep, and goats, essential to their livelihood, perished in droves. The stench of death filled the air as the Egyptians disposed of their dead animals. The loss of livestock meant a loss of food, income, and a way of life for many Egyptians. The plague brought famine closer, instilling fear and uncertainty. The once proud Egyptian farmers watched helplessly as their livelihoods were decimated. Still, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. He refused to acknowledge the suffering of his people, clinging to his belief in his own power. Section 7. Hail of Fire. The seventh plague brought a terrifying display of nature's fury, a devastating hailstorm. The skies darkened and thunder roared as hailstones, some mixed with fire, rained down upon Egypt. Crops were flattened, trees were stripped bare, and buildings were damaged by the relentless barrage. The hailstones, unlike any seen before, brought both the cold bite of ice and the searing pain of fire. The plague's ferocity left the Egyptians cowering in fear. Their gods, they realized, offered no protection against this divine wrath. Still, Pharaoh remained unyielding, his heart hardened against the pleas of his people and the undeniable power of the God of Israel.